Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Fatou Barry here. Hi, Fatou.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Just so everybody knows, Fatou is the founder of PR Girl Manifesto, which has over 40,000 members. So we're going to talk about that. She's also the co-founder of Hold the Press, which has merged with 600 and Rising. We're going to talk about that. And her day job is founder of the AB Media Group. So thanks for joining, Fatou.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So first, can you tell us about PR Girl Manifesto and Hold the Press and what led you to create those?
Yeah. So PR Girl Manifesto is probably, I think, what most people know me more for. PR Girl Manifesto is recently incorporated as a nonprofit. So we're a nonprofit now as well, but really started as a digital community, which was my shout into the dark of being young and new in an industry that didn't feel necessarily like it was home as much as I wanted it to be. So coming straight out of university and feeling that I wasn't well prepared for the actual realities of what working in PR looked like, as well as just realizing that in terms of mentorship, in terms of accessibility to the industry, it was lacking. So it started off as an Instagram page where I could share the things that I had been learning that I felt would be helpful to others, as well as really just providing an opportunity for PR professionals to connect with each other and to knowledge share, regardless of where they were in their own career trajectory, what their background was. And it grew into its own, I think, beautiful thing, which has been amazing to watch. We went from 300 Instagram followers to having a network of over 40,000 engaged members, of being able to really cultivate community with PR and communications professionals. Hold the Press is a little bit newer. And that really came out of I think, disbelief in many ways of watching how the PR industry specifically was reacting to the Great Reckoning that happened about, I think, 2 years now. Yeah, we're 2022 now. In 2020, after the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, we saw a lot of PR agencies and firms, post Black squares in solidarity, but knowing what experiences have looked like for Black PR professionals at those agencies is one, it was tone deaf, it was performative. So essentially what Hold the Press did was, call it out and hold feet to the fire of you have posted this Black square. You have said that you're committed to listening and learning, but what does the internal data of your agency actually look like? Are you just saying this and you have no Black employees? If you do have Black employees, what would they say their experiences are? So it was a call for transparency and accountability. Essentially what we requested was that agencies that posted Black squares or agencies where employees had reached out to us to ask just their diversity data, right? So what is the internal makeup? How many Black PR professionals do you employ? How many of those people are at, the C-suite level or senior leaders? And really just starting a trend or trying to start just a more, I think, open and accountable industry. And I mean, if you've been in PR, you know that diversity is a big issue in the PR world. So it's not as though we were asking for something that we did not know what the answers would be, but you can't improve, right? You can't improve and you can't measure what you're not tracking, first of all. And what we saw was that a lot of these agencies actually were not even tracking any type of diversity data. And then also this air of accountability, right? It's out there. And now that we can all see it, we can all acknowledge it and do better. So that's essentially what Hold the Press is.
Yeah. Well, there is so much. So yeah, let me dig into Hold the Press, but then I have some specific questions on PR Girl Manifesto, just like your experience with that that you mentioned. But so with Hold the Press or 600 and Rising, so yeah, so what's interesting, or what you probably thought was interesting, or what I think is interesting, is that these PR firms, they might even tell their clients what to do in terms of DNI, which they maybe are not qualified to do, number one. And then number two, what you did was you said, okay, so that's nice that you are posting a black square and that you are supposedly telling your clients to do something, whether it's performative like a black square or not. But like, here's the question: what are you doing, agency? Like, what?
Yeah.
And actually, maybe the first step in that is just what you actually ask them to do, which is look at the numbers, right? I mean, and it's fine maybe if people are, it's just good to look at, to say, oh, wait, we aren't doing anything. That's step number one, to acknowledge it. Maybe step number two is to look at our numbers. And then what? So it's like, I guess for that, it's so many questions here, but like, first of all, what did you guys find when you had that inventory? And I did look into this a little bit, and I kind of know what the steps were that you kind of said, hey, you kind of put like a call out, right? Like to agencies saying, hey, what are your numbers? And some people participated and some didn't, which could be quite telling, number one.
Absolutely.
And then if you don't remember your numbers, because this was 2 years ago, that's totally fine. And I can just look back and post that later. I'll post that for you later. But what did you guys find?
So we found a lot of key learnings. So the first was, it really was, I think, for us, just an interesting experience, right? To just see what the reception was. There were a ton of agencies that ignored our requests. And that was very telling, right? That we had reached out and we had sent communication and we followed up and we're just ignored. And it wasn't until, fortunately, that we got allies, like the PR Council and other organizations, trade organizations that backed us up and reached out, that we got a response. And so the first thing that I think that told us was that a lot of people who say that, or a lot of these agencies that are talking about doing diversity work, don't really want, like, they're not really trying to do the diversity work. It only became, I think, a point of value or important significance to them when they saw that, like, there are people that are in the industry that are rallying behind this. So that was the first telling thing. In the first year, the data was really interesting because we saw, like, in just the data that was submitted, that Black employees were actually impacted. Like, and they think, again, this is the time of COVID, right? Like, we're still in time of COVID, but when COVID was really like having a large, tremendous effect on the industry, we found that Black employees were impacted by like COVID-19 layoffs more than their white peers, which was really interesting. And then interestingly enough too, a lot of these agencies and firms are under holding companies. So we found that a lot of these agencies were also hiding like poor diversity practices behind their holding companies. So we got a lot of like, well, so-and-so submitted their data and, we're a part of that holding company. So you can refer to that. But also, like, you can't measure what you can't track, right? So a lot of people could not give us the data because they weren't tracking the data. And that was something that we found to be really interesting. And then I think for me personally, what was really surprising was that, like, there's still PR agencies that exist, like, back in 2020 and now even 2022, that don't have any, like, non-white professionals. And so that was really telling. So we learned a lot. But I think because it was our first year, it was just interesting to see how committed individuals really were to actually providing the data or making a commitment to doing so moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And like, when you reached out, you guys reached out directly to these firms, right?
Yeah. So we, and interestingly enough, we had we kept getting requests, right? So when we put out the initial list, what we had done was just really like done our research and development to see like, all right, who are the agencies, right, and firms that have posted these Black squares? And that was our initial like pool of agencies and firms that we were going to reach out to. Once we put out the list, because the biggest thing for us, what told the press to, is transparency, right? We are not the first organization or the first initiative, but to do something like this or to try to get this information. But we, I think, have always wanted to hold ourselves to like a level of transparency for everyone involved, right? That we're not hiding behind anything. Like when you think about if we were to have stakeholders in this, our stakeholders are Black employees, right? Our PR practitioners who want to make the industry better. Those are the people that we were doing this work for. And so we put the list out there, and then we started getting an influx of requests from employees at different firms like, hey, can you ask my agency and firm for their diversity data? Because I don't know what it is, right? I'm the only Black professional here, even people that weren't Black, right? Like, hi, like, I really think that you should ask this agency for their data, or these have been my experiences at this agency, yet they are, saying that they're committed to listening and learning and to making sure that, they're building equitable environments, and that's not the truth. And from then on, like, people have been able to submit agencies on a rolling basis. So we'll have agencies that we reach out to. This year, we reach out to the same ones that we had reached out to in 2020, and people have also added their own requests as well.
Oh, so you did. Okay. So you did reach out again this year.
Oh yeah. We reached out to all, so the Hold the Press, so it was our show your receipts, right? So essentially a year has passed. And we reached out to the same agencies that we had reached out to in 2020 to ask, for updated diversity data.
And then did you find anything, or is it too early to tell? You haven't looked into it yet?
So they submitted, so it was really interesting and I don't want to misquote, but I do believe it was about like the last time we reached out 80 plus. We heard back from 25 agencies this year.
Yeah, because that's probably not good news. Wait, did you say 80? You reached out to about 80 plus and you heard back from...
So the first go around, I believe, we reached out to 80 plus. And we reached out and asked for a response by September 30th. We only heard back from 25.
Yeah. Well, and it's also kind of funny because we all in PR know that no response is bad. Like, even if there's something that is interesting because we counsel our clients, whatever it may be, that we need to respond to something, even if it's not what we want. We have to be transparent and true. But so people are not doing what they tell their clients to do, like whether it's DEI or... Yeah,
they're not. And I think they're just... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to get you off.
Sorry. So what do you think, and then I'll move on to PR Girl Manifesto, but what do you think, and I know this is just subjective, or I don't know where the data is, but you did say that there are not a lot of Black people in PR. Well, is that also true in other industries? Because when you say professionals, is that also true in other industries? Because we've had systemic racism for however long. So then...
absolutely.
I don't, but is it worse in PR? Do you think it's worse in PR, or you don't know, probably?
So I think, I don't want to say to what you're saying, it is, I think it's subjective, but I think knowing my experiences and knowing what I've seen in PR, we definitely have a huge diversity issue. I don't know if it's worse or better than other industries, but I do know that it is not talked about as often and as frequently and as openly as it should be in the PR industry. Part of the reason why we merged with 600 and Rising is because we were seeing so many similarities. 600 and Rising focuses on the advertising community. Ours is focused on the PR community, but there were so many similarities, and I can't help but to assume that it's the same. And like, we know that because of systemic racism, like Black people are specifically and intentionally like left out. A lot of these industries are not feeling as though they belong in these industries. So I would not be surprised. But again, I don't know if I would say if it's better or worse. I think that PR has done a really good job at evading the spotlight on the diversity issue in the past. And it's just not something that's flying anymore.
Yeah, and it's just kind of new now that people are talking about it.
Yeah,
Because
because
some,
before you knew that the industry, like I think people are feeling more comfortable being open about like the disparities that exist. I think prior, and it's understandable, right? If you're speaking out, like whether it's intentional or not, like you might risk and compromise, like, you know, your livelihood, your job. You might not feel comfortable talking about it. So I think it's definitely understandable for people who might not have spoken up about it in the past. But I think now, just as we're seeing too, right, the turn of like what professionals value, what type of environments and industries and companies they want to work for, like it's a big thing. Like knowing that the agency or the firm or the brand you work for is in line with the things that you value, that, you know, and that they do make DE&I and any type of just like, you know, social inequity a priority, like is important.
yeah, and there's a lot more questions I would have. Like, I just can't even go into it. Like one random, not random. I mean, I can just draw a conclusion to one question I had. It just
Mm-hmm.
without really knowing or seeing that you had already followed up with them. But I was just thinking, what does the landscape look like for Black people in PR now? Is it changing?
Yeah.
But see, how could you answer that if people didn't get back to you? Just,
Yeah, no,
I don't
exactly.
know.
I think that's another thing too, right? It's like yeah, we're open about it. And I think this was one of the things that was a misconception or people perceived when we first put it out. It's like, yeah, we are, you know, doing this publicly, but it's not because we want to like shame anyone or want to like make anybody out to be a villain. But it's like, if we are not tracking this data and if we're not tracking it openly, like we cannot make the industry better, because what are we making better if we don't know? Right? How do we make this community, this industry, a more equitable one for everyone if we don't even know where, like we know through experience what the inequities are, but we're not tracking it and we're not having public discourse and dialogue about it with the people who are affected by it.
I guess one last question about this, and then the question I have regarding PR Girl Manifesto could tie into this because it does deal with women. But so last question on Hold the Press and 600 and Rising. Just in general, or it's just a general PR question, really. What do you think of PR people trying to give DEI advice to their clients? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think that this is a great question, because I think that there are two ways you could look at this, right? I think part of it is like we have to leave the DE&I work to the DE&I people, right? Because this is what, like, it's not just there's been an uptick, right, in popularity about like let's focus on DE&I, but it's really like a learned and very delicate, I think, profession and practice, right? Where it can't be a free for all. I definitely think that PR practitioners should be flagging and should be highlighting the importance of like, you know, proper DE&I practices and its significance to their clients. However, I think when we're talking about doing the work, like we have to have people who are credible and knowledge and certified in these things, because it's such like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is so like delicate to and it affects so many people that it can't just be something that's done like half-hearted. Oh, why can I not say this word?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, it can't. Yeah. It cannot be that. It has to be really intentional. So I think while there are PR practitioners who might be, well, I mean, but honestly, then there's like, okay, but is it a function of PR and communications, right? And if that's the case, then should PR practitioners get certified in DE&I, which I completely agree, because we're communicating. I think it's a big part about how we communicate to diverse groups as PR professionals. So I really think I think irregardless of if a PR professional is certified or not, they should still like stress the value of it to their clients and to their partners. However, I think that like they should also lean on the DE&I professionals that are out there that are doing this work consistently on a daily and who have like extreme, tremendously like insightful, just like thoughts to contribute.
Yeah. Okay. So to clarify, you're saying maybe we should get our DEI certificate, but then just know our place, right? Like,
Yeah. And when I say no, I think when saying knowing our place, also knowing that like you, again, this is a delicate thing. So like we can get certified, we can like lean into like best practices, but I think if we're really talking about doing, DE&I the right way and advising our clients to do it the right way, I think we have to point them in the direction of DE&I practitioners who have been doing this work for some time, because you also don't want it to get like misconstrued. I think DE&I is such a popular buzzword that a lot of people think that they're doing, great DE&I work, but the reality is that when it comes to like actually translating, that it's not the case. Because I don't think it's something that like, I think, again, like I said, people who have been doing DE&I work and who are committed to DE&I work, their viewpoint is a little bit different than somebody who is just like, has this, has gotten a certification or intuitively or like value-wise knows, what direction they should be leading in versus being a DE&I professional.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that helps. Thank you. I was thinking about getting my DEI certificate only because I'm interested in it, and I can't do it. I'm not going to do DEI. I just think, well, I don't really want to study a lot of other things. Like I'm not that interested in other things. Yeah. And this is just would be interesting, and maybe it could help, bring something to the table.
Of course.
I think what we do, though, is say to our clients, you need to do the DEI work first and then talk to us about the PR. Like I can't, we're not having that conversation right now, and we're just not doing your DEI. Like I can't, like I'm not qualified.
But that's valid, right? That I think that is how it should go, because then you're ensuring that it's being done the right way. And I also think the fact that like, you are requiring clients to do the work is important. I think one of the things that we saw too that was really interesting, which I loved for PR professionals and communicators, is that like we had a moment to really kind of like tell clients like, hey, like this is what we're about. We need you to do the work. And if you're not trying to do the work, like this might not be the most viable working relationship,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to ask you. So I have a friend who will just not like, she's busy enough. PR people are busy. We don't need a bunch of clients, right? So if a client comes to her, like a prospective client, she'll vet them just by looking at who's at the top, like who is, whatever you call it, like the board or leadership. And if there's no minorities, she's just not going to work with them, like, because she just doesn't have the time to do any counseling on that. And it's just it's really just about time. And like
it's labor too. Like I think there's the whole conversation about this, that like part of this conversation that people leave out is like DE&I work, or having to kind of like get people to see like, well, there's a gap here. Like that's emotional labor, right? Like if someone's not outwardly just like, if a company's coming to you and they don't think that they have a problem by having like non people, like who have no, I think like historically underrepresented, underserved people like on their board or within their like company, that's a whole bunch of emotional labor on the part of the professional who has to explain to them. And I think it's valid to be like, yeah, I'm just not going, this is not like a prospective client for me because
and take away that emotional labor, especially, if you're a minority, kind of having to have that conversation. And then it is just a good way to vet clients, because we can't work with everybody. And so, it's not necessarily rude, because you think, well, you do have a struggle because you think, well, maybe it will, if they want to change or they can grow or they can evolve. But it's like, but then, we've kind of had those conversations, and a lot of times there's too much, we get a lot of, it's too hard, or like we can't do it because, this is already established. And it's like, well, this has been established for way too long. We need to change.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So now about PR Girl Manifesto, I want to hear all about it. But first, it's just, the question is, we've been talking about this a lot in the industry that, there might be a lot of women in PR, and that's great and interesting, but are there a lot of women leaders in PR? And what's happening with that? right
Woo!
now?
I love that question in this conversation because I think that it's just so interesting how people are like, oh no, women are in PR, like that's the industry that women are thriving. But I'm like, all right, how many women senior leaders and how many women are in C-suite positions in the PR industry? And it's very, very, very little. Yeah, women make up like a great portion of this industry, but women are still working for brands and corporations and agencies that are led by white men, right? And it's just so interesting to me that like that perception of the industry exists, because it's like, well, how many like women do you know are at like, again, C-suite at some of these top firms, right? How many, just even being acknowledged and recognized, like a woman-led, woman-owned firms. How often do you are you seeing that? Who owns the firm, right? Who's the CEO of the firm? So I always think that's interesting because we are in the industry, but when you look at the numbers of how many women actually make up like the senior level and C-suite, there's not that many of us.
I know. And so how do we find those numbers? Because I've wanted to just do a piece on this, like a blog post or something, and I don't know if I'm not looking in the right place or I've been struggling finding these numbers.
Yeah, there is. There is a report that this professor, and her name is escaping me right now, but I will find it. She does a report about like the state of women in the PR industry. And that's where a lot of these numbers you can see like, all right, what's the makeup of the industry? How many of those women in like the data pool that she has, like how many of those women are actually like in these positions? I have to find I'll find it.
We'll find it and share it with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then you said some kind of interesting, I guess, more personal things when you were talking about PR Girl Manifesto. And I just wanted to follow up on that. You mentioned that you didn't feel that the industry was welcoming to you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. And so in full transparency, like this is from this, of course, it will be from my personal experience. Well, when I first entered the industry, PR had a reputation for being very lily white, right? It was very hard for me to find women in the PR space that looked like me, that had my background. I am a Guinean immigrant, right? I am I'm Muslim identifying. I'm a Black woman. Like these were all things that I struggled to find in the PR industry in terms of representation, in terms of it being reflected back at me. And we talk about, it kind of links back to this conversation we're having about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there's this whole other part of it of like belonging, right? Does this industry give people who look like me a sense of belonging? And at the time, it definitely didn't. And it's not an experience that's in a silo. I think because most people of color that you will talk to that, talk about the PR industry have had similar experiences where they felt like this industry kind of leans towards a certain type of individual, a certain type of professional. So when I say that it wasn't welcoming, that's a lot of that is coming from like not being able to see someone that looked like me, someone that had my experiences in a space that like is really responsible for like storytelling, for communicating, and for also like helping I think identify like what stories matter, right? So there was that. And I think too, there was also this air of like community wasn't a thing in PR. And I think that's why so many people gravitated towards PR Girl Manifesto, and it's continued to grow because our North Star is community. It felt like you weren't supposed to be friends with other PR professionals outside of the ones that you worked with because like they're your potential competition. So it just was a little bit, I think, alarming and discouraging. And so really, for me, PR Girl Manifesto was like again, the shout into the dark to kind of like go against the grain of those things and build a platform and a community that, was collaborative, that did reflect, diversity in experience, diversity in thought, and just like diversity in general.
Okay. And then, this is kind of random. Did you work as a freelancer when you were kind of getting into this?
So when I first, when I first started, I was working in a license, so Iconics brand group. I was actually working in-house, and gravitated out of working in-house and started freelancing. So I've had like a pretty like interesting and like diverse background where I've been in-house, I've worked at an agency, and I've done my own thing, and now I have my own agency.
Okay. Yeah. I just feel like when we are freelance or when we own our own agency, that community is very important because we're so siloed. And so I love that you've created PR Girl Manifesto because you have these funny videos and I'm like, oh, that's so true. That's so me. And
sometimes you just need someone to be like, wow, like I get it. This is exactly what I'm experiencing. This is what, this is what work looks like for me too. But I also think like creating a culture like where everyone can learn and collaborate from each other. So we're really big on like sharing within the network. We're really big on being able to like bridge gaps for our community members too, because and it might not be like the most, I think, traditional viewpoint, but I really don't think that knowledge, like we should be something that's inaccessible, like because of like, so I don't think we should be just paying to like learn, and I've always felt like that. And I think you see a lot of that in the way that we navigate the community. Because again, like a lot of the stuff that we're doing is not new. But I think we are one of the more open and one of like the first community like organizations that are not, requiring you to be a part of a cohort where you're paying to be a part of it, or not putting up like an access gap through making it a paid like community it's there, it's free. All of it is volunteer, and I think that that's what really, again, like in anything that I do, community members are my stakeholders. So I'm like, they are my North Star in like what we're providing. And I think that's why the community resonates with so many people.
Yeah. And also you're telling the truth. Like it's fun, truthful post about what PR is like. Whereas the other professional organizations, they're all professional. Like there's no color to some of their stuff, and like with this it's like, oh, this is real, and that's also
learn and have fun. Like those they're not mutually exclusive. We can learn, we can have fun, we can laugh, we can poke fun at our industry, we can have serious conversations. Like it shouldn't feel so like linear and like militant,
Yeah. So then last question is, it kind of ties into something you said, but then there's a question to it. So you did mention that you didn't feel well prepared when you came into the industry. And so if you could talk to a new person or talk to yourself back in the day when you came in, what would you tell them about either what to be prepared for or how to be prepared?
Yeah, I'd say like you got to immerse yourself. So PR is one of those industries where we can learn like textbook, just like by the book. This is what this looks like. This is how you write a press release. This is what a campaign looks like. Oh, this is what a SWOT, like all of those things. But like, it's really one of those industries where you have to immerse yourself in it. So one of the biggest things that I think I wish I had done is really trying to find like hands-on like PR experience, right? While I was in undergrad through internships. Granted, my situation, I went to school in Buffalo, I went to University of Buffalo. It is not the most booming place for public relations work. And I had PR internships, but I think I really would have appreciated like being working for a firm or interning for a firm or agency or brand that had a robust PR department so that I could learn all that was available to me, right? I think the biggest thing that we're seeing and what we've heard too, and even like the college, like students that are, you know, in our community that are in college, is that it feels very by the book and not reflective of like what the industry currently looks like. So I think I would definitely stress to find opportunities, one, like with firms, agencies, or brands that are thriving, that have like robust PR departments, and then also like ask questions. I wish I had set up more informational interviews with PR professionals back when I was in college. I think that would have been really, really insightful. And been able to just show me the range, right? Of like, all right, what are all the different industries I can do PR for? Maybe I should talk to a PR professional who is in this industry. Maybe I should see like what other things fall within this PR umbrella, right? And just done a lot more. Yeah. So I've done a lot more informational interviews because I think you learn so much, and it's a great networking opportunity as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's practice for interviews. Yeah. And then also, I love the hands-on experience. Try to get that for either if you're going to a smaller firm, will you get to do more work, or a firm that has like diverse clients and you can see what it's like to work on everything. Firms are really great for a starting point because you kind of get to do lots of different things and work on different, not only clients, but different types of marketing. Whereas in-house it's kind of cool to like switch over to in-house when you're a little more established, but I don't know how much, you don't have as much variety possibly. I don't know. I've never worked in-house, but that was just really random. Well, thank you. So how can we find you and all the different things you're involved in and the different groups?
Yeah. So, I'm usually on the PR Girl Manifesto page, so I think that's a great place. So PR Girl Manifesto on all platforms. So we are on Instagram, we are on LinkedIn, we are on Twitter, and then our website is prgirlmanifesto.org. From the PR Girl Manifesto platforms, you can also link out to the Hold the Press platforms as well. So, because they're linked. And then for me, I am on LinkedIn, Fatou B Barry. Please feel free to connect with me. I am also on Instagram sporadically. So, those are great ways to stay connected. But if you reach out to PR Girl Manifesto or Hold the Press, you're typically probably speaking to me. So those are great ways to start. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, not only for your time today, but also for your great work in building community and advocating for Black people in PR. So we all, I'm sure, appreciate that.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. This was so much fun. And I thank you for holding space for the conversation.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.